All right. Welcome everyone. As per tradition, please give me a thumbs up if you can hear my voice relatively well. I know it's not ideal each and every time, but I would appreciate it if you gave me an emoji if it's okay. If it's not, you can give me a thumbs down and I'll get the memo. All right. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Zay. Thank you, everyone. Okay, cool. Um, so we're gonna have a strange sort of exploration today. Let's take a line of thinking and go on a little journey. I'm gonna use some references that I have to sort of try to help expand our minds a little bit and sort of like understand. I've been thinking lately about the meaning and the meaningfulness of well, rationality and objectivity and both that and the darkness of the world. And as we all see, I guess in an objective sense, even the world isn't necessarily leaning towards more positive outcomes recently. And I feel, and I've talked about this in the past, I feel that there's an overwhelming amount of sort of like hopelessness that has sort of like some sort of strange veil covered up most of the world, right? There are sentiments of there are nihilistic sentiments, eschatonic sentiments, so on and so forth, and largely that mostly lies, like the fault of that lies within, you know, each and every person that fails to see their own responsibility and obviously creating the world that they want to live in and hopefully they want their children to live in. I want to talk about a very short but very interesting and underrated sort of like a short story. It's not even a novella, I guess, by the infamous H.P. Lovecraft. um he wrote this back in the day. It's sort of like written with a little bit of a, how to say, like outdated language and slang, but I believe it's one of his more prestigious works and one of his more accurate works in displaying human psychology as it relates to the irrational and the unknown. And we're entering now an era where we have to interface with the irrational and with the unknown, well, more and more. That's why we're here, right? That's why you're on your journey for spiritual advancement and spiritual evolution. Um, because you innately, I guess, feel that we're entering a stage. Not only are we entering stages of our personal lives that demand something more and something beyond the material, but we're also entering a stage of civilization and strife and so on and so forth that will demand the faculties of pragmatism and practicality to be balanced with the open-mindedness to understand and really understand, let's say, intuitive knowledge and intuitive wisdom. So we're going to be talking about today about The Temple by H.P. Lovecraft. Now there's a wonderful video of this. Like if you're not at a not big reader, there's a wonderful video of this that's sort of like voice acted on YouTube. If you just type The Temple by H.P. Lovecraft, you'll get a bunch of these, and you can like listen through that later on if you'd like. But I'm going to give you sort of like a short recount and my own interpretation of why this manuscript, why this work is. It teaches us a very important thing about human psychology, something that Lovecraft, even back in the day, grasped very well. So the temple basically takes place in the sort of like alternate version of the World War I era, where a German submarine, a military submarine with its whole crew, very proud and very Aryan, I guess. They sort of descend into deep and heavy waters due to being tracked by enemy submarines, right? Now, the problem that they have, this whole crew, is that they went in, relatively deep. And as you know, like how, submarines are built usually, like, there's only like a certain amount of, I believe fathoms they're called, right? Like the metric you use for like how far deep you can go underwater. So there's only basically like a certain threshold that the submarine can take in terms of like, pressure like in the water and so on and so forth before it cracks. So they ended up, climbing down a little bit too far than they, wanted to. And obviously, some military situation, you would rather sort of like find yourself in a troublesome spot underwater than become blown out of it completely, which guarantees your death. So it's basically about this crew of Germans that gets lost underwater, and it's sort of like written in this sort of like a journal by a fella called Karl Heinrich, right? He's this lieutenant commander in the Imperial German Navy, and he's in charge of this submarine, which is called the U-29, right? And it's written in a sense where he deposited this message that you're reading in sort of like a bottle that, I guess, fell into the reader's hands, and now you're sort of like reading about it. Well, long story short, um, they start having these strange incidents, right? As they sort of like start going deeper and deeper into the water, where there are dead bodies showing up like outside of the submarine, so on and so forth. Some of the submarine crew members are having visions, right, of dead people swimming along the submarine, right? Um, um, and how do I say, the atmosphere is very um, where it's very dreary, right? So why we say that this is an alternate universe is that, well, World War I submarines like did not have what we call sort of like an outer headlight or anything like that, or like some sort of window through which you could stare like into the water, into the depth of the water, right? But in this case, they do. So it's, I guess, sort of like this enhanced, upgraded version of a submarine. And what they do is like sometimes for a few hours a day, I guess, they'll turn the light on and then they'll shine this light, into the darkness of the water to see what's going on, right? So as they slip further and further down into the depths, right, all the way to the bottom of the ocean, on their way, um, they encounter strange phenomena. Well, firstly, they encounter dolphins, and these are dolphins that are just swimming along and circling the submarine in a strange, almost like ritualistic manner. It creeps the crew out, right? It creeps them out really bad. And sort of like when they count, like, well, how deep are they? One of the crew members says that it's not likely for dolphins to swim at these depths, right? Like there shouldn't be any dolphins here. So some of the men start imagining these dolphins as um, deceased bodies of their fellow countrymen and the Englishmen that they killed on the other side of the many battles that they had during their tenure as soldiers. Um, and some of them even go a little bit insane because they swear to the captain, Mr. Karl Heinrich, I guess they swear to the captain that some of these soldiers, like their eyes are open and closing. They're swimming along. They're swimming closer to the window of the submarine at night, like when they're staring out of the window using the headlight. So, something's happening to these guys. So it could be, let's say, like a bout of insanity. It could be like that, anxiety is very high. It could be hallucinations for all we know. So our Karl Heinrich, who is the captain of this, like fair submarine, he, like, a very large portion of how this manuscript is written, it like this character about his own self in first person. He talks in sort of like a prideful sense that he is a proud Rhinelander, meaning he considers himself a proud German, and a pure German at that. And because of his, how to say, pragmatic and logical, faculties that he has, he can sort of determine in a scientific and empirical sense, um, what's happening to the crew. And his own theory of what's happening to his crew is that, well, firstly, they're, largely inexperienced, and some of them are cowardly, and so on and so forth. And some of them are having hallucinations, and they're having some sort of psychological issue with dealing with these hallucinations. He has a first hand who is a very supportive presence, by the name of Cleanser. Um, and they sort of like work together to, I don't know, like to calm down the nerves of the crew members and sort of like harmonize them and bring them together, right? Like it works for a little bit, but you know, sometimes it doesn't. And then you sort of like have this sort of like Lovecraftian Cthulhu style thing where, one of the crew members goes completely insane, and he's, grabbing at his hair and just like lunging himself into the walls, trying to, and take his own life. And he's yelling out like, he is calling, or something like that, like something crazy, right? Something is calling to him, right, from the depths of the water, right? Now, what could it be? Like, maybe you go insane. Have you ever like sort of like walked into a room full of silence, like one of those like sound deprivation rooms? I feel like that's how it would feel when you're so like that deep down underwater, right, stuck in a fucking submarine with a bunch of, crazy soldiers. Um, Now, the captain says something interesting here, where um, you know one of his crewmates, like, um, had gone so insane that he attacked him, right? He like physically attacked him, right? um and as they were sort of like, protecting themselves from these sort of like crazy crew members, and maybe like detaining them or punishing them, or like jailing them or putting them in a separate room, a whole bunch of other crew members went out, and they started a coup of some sort, and they went into the engine room, and they sabotaged the engine room, right? They wanted out of there, right? They wanted out there completely. So, long story short, why I'm telling you this, the sort of like the rational and pragmatic captain, who is sort of like holding himself together, he is able to um sort of like pull himself through a little bit better than most. I feel like, well, he's able to do so because he has a position of influence and rank, and sort of a position of responsibility. But most of all, I think because he prides himself in being a rational, pragmatic human being, right? So what happens next is, they sort of like rush through the submarine, and they, detain and punish all of the crew members that, like led the coup, that led the rebellion. But one of the crew members, I don't remember how exactly, but they pull out like this statue, where they found like a little marble statue of a I don't know what it was. Like it was a goddess, or s- yeah, let's say like a marble statue of a Greek style goddess, perhaps from some old sunken Atlantean type of city, from their pocket, right? And they're enamored by this statue, right? um, they're enamored by this statue for, several reasons. There's something mystical about it, right? There's something that they can't explain about it, like, what's going on, what is it? um, and as they descend into the waters, so basically the whole story is like, as they're descending into the waters deeper and deeper and deeper, more and more crew members start going mad. They start going insane, and more crew members are, well, either dead, or they're shooting them out into the water, and then other crew members are swearing that they're seeing now these dead crew members swimming along the submarine as they turn on the headlights, right, as they're sort of like um, going further down and down creeps them out even more. So at the end of the day, the journal reaches its apex point where they land at the very bottom of the ocean floor, right? And it's just the captain and his first mate, um, dear Mr. Cleanser, left, right? There's only two of them, of the whole crew. Um, and as they shine this headlight onto the bottom of the ocean, they see this incredibly ancient and massive and grandiose structure. So they start to make out structures in the bottom of the ocean. They see they see like a fallen Atlantean city, right? That's what it looks like. Um, and the first mate over time goes insane as well, right? And the captain, like you know, our good guy, Captain Karl Heinrich, is describing his loneliness and how lonely he feels now because, well, he's the only rational, pragmatic, crew member left on this goddamn ship, right? Um, his guy, the last guy is going insane, and I don't remember what happens to him, but I believe Cleanser kills himself, and as he's left alone, right? As he's left alone with his journal, or Captain Carl, as he's sort of like describing his final emotions as they've sunk onto the bottom of the ocean floor. He talks about again his pragmatism for a little bit. He touches on that, and then he talks about like his sort of like day-to-day survival, and his day-to-day survival is like, well, I'm going to write this message, and as soon as sort of like my ink dries up and I run out of oil, I'll have no other choice than to turn the headlight on one last time, get the like sort of like the water suit or the submersible suit on and just go and explore this ancient ruin that you know that's standing against us, like towards us in its full greatness. So what he does one day, he pulls the headlights on and he looks into the structure and he sees a very pale glimmer of light coming out of it, and he can't believe his eyes, right? And he says, "There's no way I'm seeing this. There's there's no way, um, right, that I'm seeing this." And he writes this in his journal that, I'm looking at this old ancient Atlantean ruin, but how could there be any sort of luminescence or light coming out of, um, a sunken ruin? Is it a reflection? What is it, right? Um, and in his mind, what he's seeing there is, well, he says, well, it's finally getting to me, this whole terrible situation, the crazy swimming corpses, the dolphins circling the submarine, me being alone stuck at the bottom of the ocean is probably getting to me, and I'm finally hallucinating, right? And then as he sort of like collects the bravery and the boldness to venture out into these deep waters, you know he ventures like a little bit more and more and more, like into depth, like every other day, I guess. And he describes that now, alongside this glimmer of light, he also hears a strange humming, like a strange tune, right? Like a strange music that's coming out of this ancient structure. And then he thinks, well, now I'm definitely going insane. How can there be music here? There's no way. There's not a chance for there to be music here, right? And as he basically gradually approaches this, grand structure, he sort of like comes closer to this sort of temple, right? And he sees a larger version of that marble statue that one of his crew members retrieved and that they were enamored with, right? There was some mystical element to it. And these types of statues are lined up right across this temple. And his last and final thoughts right? I'm gonna read it to you guys. Then you can rewatch this because it's very epic. Like I, it's more epic than I can tell you right now. It's like a very basic rundown, but we can't get through the whole thing, of course. But um, this is the last few paragraphs, I guess, of what he experiences. So I'm going to read it to you. It is well that the reader accept nothing which follows as objective truth. For since the events transcend natural law, they are necessarily the subjective and unreal creations of my overtaxed mind. When I attained the cunning tower, I found the sea in general far less luminous than I had expected. There was no animal or vegetable phosphorescence about, and the city that sloped down to the river was invisible in blackness. What I did see was not spectacular, not grotesque or terrifying, yet it removed my last vestige of trust in my consciousness. For the door and windows of the undersea temple hewn from the rocky hill were vividly aglow with a flickering radiance as from a mighty altar flame far within. Later incidents are chaotic. As I stared at the uncannily lighted door and windows, I became subject to the most extravagant visions. Visions so extravagant, objects in the temple for me. I thought of poor Cleanser, and wondered where his body rested with the image he had carried back into the sea. He had warned me of something, and I had not heeded, but he was a soft-headed Rhinelander who went mad at troubles a Prussian could bear with ease. Correcting myself here, apparently our Karl the captain was a proud Prussian, and it was Cleanser who was a filthy Rhinelander. But continuing. The rest is very simple. My impulse to visit and enter this temple has now become an inexplicable and imperious command, which ultimately cannot be denied. My own German will no longer controls my acts, and volition is henceforward possible only in minor matters. Such madness it was protected in the ocean. Helmet and air regenerator for instant donning, and immediately commence to write this hurried message in the hope that it may some day reach the world. I shall seal the manuscript in a bottle and entrust it to the sea as I leave the U-29 forever. I have no fear, not even from the prophecies of the madman cleanser. What I have seen cannot be true, and I know that this madness of my own will at most lead only to suffocation when my air is gone. The light in the temple is a sheer delusion, and I shall die calmly, like a German, in the black and forgotten depths. This demoniac laughter which I hear as I write comes only from my own weakening brain. So I will carefully don my diving suit, and walk boldly up the steps into that primal shrine, that silent secret of unfathomed waters and uncounted years. Okay, now um why is this little sort of like horror show short story significant in the study of the human psyche? Right. Um when we encounter the paranormal or paralogical or supernatural or whatever we want to call it, the what does what does the mind do, right? Well, the first thing the mind does is it reels itself in and it tries to give you some sort of rational explanation for what's going on. And for all you know, this is the absolute correct and right thing to do, of course. you want to explain the events that are occurring within the frame of logic and the law of physics and your past experiences, right? Because it's more comfortable to do so. But now what happens if you fall into a supernatural or paralogical sort of like experience, which increasingly people in our world even like will fall into, yet you reject that, um, which is happening in front of you, right? And let's say if I can reject the paranormal and paralogical and sort of like blame it on the weakening or weakening mental state of mind, or the lack of certain intellectual like qualities or capacities to like understand the objectivity of whatever is occurring around me, um in the end, do we know the answer even in this short story, whether our dear Captain, Heinrich, um, is hallucinating or not? Do we know the answer whether the humming and the voices and the songs he hears coming out from this temple is in any way, shape, or form objective and real or not, right? Like, are they sort of like relevant in an objective sense, existing in the world, or are they just like creations or hallucinations of his mind? Is it some sort of pattern unfolding? Well, this is why this short story is so nice to sort of like ponder, is because you really don't know. And because you really don't know, um, you understand that it is the character's understanding of their own psyche that determines the experience that they're having. So let's say if you see something paralogical, and if you look at that and you sort of like reflect onto yourself and say, I must be dreaming, or I must be in this strange state where I'm imagining. Like, for example, I knew a woman who was considered to have psychosis, psychotic episodes, and she would sometimes like swear that she would see rats and cockroaches crawling around the room, right? Now, um, objectively, are there rats and cockroaches in the room? No, right? Does she sort of like see them? Does she imagine them to be there? Well, yes, of course. Like, judging from the authenticity and genuine nature of her psychotic outbursts, one could say, yes, okay, like she is experiencing the full breadth of these things, right? Um, Insanity and psychosis and schizophrenia and the paralogical and paranormal are very dangerous things when they're experienced alone, is what I'm trying to say, right? Now the collective experiences of the crew, they're also put under, when put under scrutiny, they're also rather questionable, because there is such psychological phenomena as group hallucinations, right? Like mutual hallucinations, where actually the people who are sort of like playing part in this anxiety ridden scenario, and they're going through something dark together, like a relatively negative and dark experience, they start affecting one another, and the paranoia can be quite overwhelming, and it can sort of like spread between different minds a lot more as well. So even that's put under question. So just because like we all see rats and cockroaches in the room, or we all think we see rats and cockroaches in the room, doesn't even that doesn't necessarily mean that there are rats and cockroaches in the room. What I'm trying to say is this: um, it's very difficult for a person alone to start seeing patterns or paralogical or supernatural patterns in their life, and sort of like be able to get out of that mindset where they're like, well, I must be going insane, I must be making things up, da, da, da. It's very difficult for an um like an unwizened mind to determine what is an illusory experience caused by some sort of insecure or critical state of their mind, and what is a true paralogical or supernatural or irrational event they might be experiencing. Um, like your master is the experience you choose, in a sort of sense, right? So your master is, well, okay, I choose to believe that I'm someone who's a very objective and empirical and science-based person, and like what I'm seeing or experiencing right now is probably some sort of strange juxtaposition of very unlikely outcomes stacked on top of one another, right? If you get like really, really unlucky, let's say you get really unlucky in a game of poker like 16 times in a row, right? You might say, well, there's something going on here. There's some strangeness to how these processes are unfolding, or you could say that, well, okay, like if you come out of the standpoint of math and numbers and how to say the chances of it occurring, like there's still some potential chance of it occurring, but the chance is usually like so small, it's like 0.001% or something along those lines, right? So it's up to the mind to give meaning to their experiences. So let's say our dear captain, of how he describes his experience, and we don't know if the experience is objectively true or not because we weren't there and no one else was and only he was. Um, we don't know. But what we do know is that he is someone who chose to believe in the idea that I am a pragmatic man, that I am someone who looks at things in an objective and logical manner. So logically, if I'm seeing something that is highly unlikely to be there, then I must be going crazy. So disregard that was his final message, was disregard everything I'm going to say, disregard everything I say in the story, because I must be insane if I'm seeing these things. Get what I'm trying to tell you? Like that's a scary position to be put in for the average person. Because if you're not willing to work with the idea of insanity and psychosis, you're not really well equipped to even have those paralogical or supernatural experiences, because these are experiences that can make or break your mind, right? So you have to be very careful with, in terms of like careful, what you wish for, that type of thing, because irrational and supernatural experiences, and they really do happen. They have this tendency to really put you on the edge, in the sense of like, am I making this up? Like it opens up like a whole different sort of like set of challenges for the mind to decipher. And sort of like how you know whether something is a mystical experience or a paralogical experience or not is, well, what kind of meaning you attach to it with your mind. That can be what is left as the determining factor of the function and quality of whatever strangeness you're experiencing in your life, or whatever synchronicity you're experiencing in your life, or whatever ever like bad luck or bad fortune or irrational sort of like things you're experiencing. And I know you guys had this before too, right? Like sometimes like things will stack up in your life that just seem like either too good or too bad. They're a little bit like, they're really fishy, right? In a sense where like, like did it have to happen this way? Like, there's a little bit of a, like you sort of like sit down and like do the math, and the chances of it occurring are so fucking minuscule that you like what were the chances that this was gonna happen? But it did, right? Um, Now you can't completely deny the math of it, but at the same time you have this like crazy doubtfulness to it. So what I'm trying to sort of like teach here, I guess, is that whatever you impress onto the experience, that's what you'll get out of it, right? And intuitively, like you have to have sort of like a deep inner knowing and a sense of how to say, um, destined, being destined to have had certain experiences to really take out their full function and meaning. Now, if you lean into pragmatism and objectivity only, you might miss out on having these supernatural experiences or irrational experiences. You can't just like echo and reflect everything back onto your psyche and say, well, I must be insane if I'm seeing this right now. You need to have enough of an open mind to sort of like, and open eyes and ears and many of the other senses, to say, well, okay, like what I'm seeing right now is probably like really out there, but I'm seeing it. Or what I've experienced right now in the form of several synchronicities in a row, as they add up and stack up, and the chances of that occurring turn so cosmically minuscule, low, that at some point you need to think, okay, like I guess this isn't just some sort of weird coincidence, right? So if you sort of like input that into your experiences, if you're able to input the idea that it's not that I'm going insane, it is that I'm dealing with something paralogical. I'm dealing with something that's beyond, pragmatic thought, beyond objective metrics. That's something that's beyond the laws of physics and so on and so forth. That way, you can sort of like at least determine where you stand and actually grab something from those irrational experiences. Though I myself, I've had a lot of irrational experiences in my life, a few what I would call supernatural experiences as well. And to me, it's such a strange experience with those, because in the moment, like you feel it so vividly, right? And it's almost like undeniable. It has like this undeniable quality to it as you're experiencing the thing in the moment. But the next day, you go to sleep, you go into that subconscious cycle, and you wake up, and like the sun is rising, and the birds are chirping again. You go out and you you put your naked feet on the ground, and suddenly like that thing s- seems and sounds more fantastical, and you start to like ground that thing into like, well, is it like, was it actually that fantastical or magical in the first place? So the answer to that is it's both, right? It's both. And once you learn that, once you understand that it doesn't have to be just one thing, it can be both. So it could also be something that's paralogical and supernatural. And it's also something that's highly super duper unlikely, but still mathematically possible, right? Usually that is the form in which the supernatural makes itself known to you. So it has to be something that's on the precipice, like the precipice meaning it has to be something that's difficult, but um, difficult to explain in pragmatic and logical terms, but still possible. But it will be just fantastical enough. It'll be just luck based enough. It'll be just mystical enough to get that thought process out of you. Like that's how you know if you're dealing with something paralogical or supernatural, right? That's how you know. This is a very big lesson, because as you sort of like get into, well, I guess spirituality and so on and so forth, and you, let's say, start having dreams or maybe even visions. Not everyone has them. Not everyone has to have them. Some people will have the experiences like in a different sense of life. They'll see patterns, or patterns of numbers, repeating patterns of numbers, repeating patterns of words, repeating patterns of music, paintings. I don't know, a person who sees the same painting like 3 times a day, right? Like, they just do it. Um, um, now the chances of that occurring are, quite low, but the chances are there, right? Boom, boom, boom. Um, but the chances are also so small that you can't help but think, but like maybe there's something more to this. Maybe like something's trying to tell me something with this, right? Um, if you are unbalanced, right? Very much like the crew of our little story who, basically went insane when dealing with the irrational, right? They couldn't open their minds to the idea that something was happening beyond their mind to it. They probably would have, they, they did not succumb to even the idea that something supernatural was going on, but on the contrary, they impressed upon, or they attempted to impress upon, whatever paralogical or supernatural was going on, their own ideas of logic and objectivity, to the point where they became, you know, a self-destructive force, in the sense, well, they're saying that I am probably insane, right? And sort of like going against my own mind, and looking at my own mind as sort of like as the enemy of the scene presented. There's a big lesson in this, okay? And the lesson is, if you want progress with the mystical, then you have to become accustomed to a balance, and you have to become accustomed to understanding that, mystical experiences are not something that are like fuzzy wuzzy dreams, right? They are deeply deeply concerning at times, and you need a certain level of sort of like mastery over the emotional self, and mastery over the objective self, and a like very stoic and good and decent emotional state to interface with things like this. This is why most people are not able to interface with things like this on a regular basis, because their mind will sort of like crack under it, right? It's not good for them. Like, they're not ready for this sort of like thing, and it's fine. Like, if you're someone like that, I envy you, right? Because you have great sort of like exploration ahead of you, but at the same time, you don't have to go through all these hula hoops that we just talked about. TLDR, and moral of the story is, we live in a world that is a precipice, right? It's a portal to, other things. And sometimes things in your life, when you're dealing with the irrational, are going to happen in a way where they are just fantastical enough to be strange, and just logical enough to be not completely, out there crazy. Those are the two modalities through which the universe, I guess, like unfolds its truth for you, and it sort of like shows you that, you have all of these language systems that it can interface with you with, right? Like we said, like one of them being like numbers or words or paintings or songs or whatever, right? mm, if you have balance, and if you can take everything you encounter in this life with a calm heart, right? This is why emotions are like very difficult in this case, because if you're an emotionally sort of like unstable person, if you can't like emotionally sort of like prep yourself and open yourself up for a mystical experience, it's going to be very difficult. But if you are able to do it, um, you will start to receive. So again, like, you have to be emotionally stable and, relatively stoic, but then you also need to have sort of like the logical and pragmatic, like thinking qualities. You can't just go in there with like your eyes open and like, like eating mushrooms every other day. Get it? Like, there has to be a balance. Um, just to mention with the mushrooms, you don't need any of that, by the way. I'm totally against it, my personal opinion. But interfacing with the mystical means first seeking balance and understanding, um, can I be an objective, practical, pragmatic person? Can I decipher different situations in objective, truthful, meaningful ways? Yes or no? And once that hurdle's passed, you move on to sort of like the second stage and the second layer, which is, well, if I do interface with the mystical, am I ready to sort of like accept it for what it is? Am I, willing to accept it? Actually, accept it for am I willing to accept for something more than it really is, right? Because if you buy like three tickets, right, and all three of them like hit the jackpot, right? Like, what are the chances of that happening? Like, incredibly low. Like, they're so minuscule that they shouldn't even happen, right? Like, the chances are so slim that just the fact that they happen 3 times in a row. So let me put this into numbers for you, and we can finish it off with this. So let's say you winning one jackpot if you buy 3 tickets is 0.00001%. Okay. Now, if you win that jackpot and if you buy another ticket and buy a second jackpot, the chance of that is 0.0000000000001%. And if you win a third one, that you get so many zeros there that it basically becomes fantastical. It basically becomes a supernet. It basically is like the universe winking its eye at you. Get what I'm trying to say? And it's always going to be the precipice on like, holy moly. But now, if you told someone, right, if you told your friend, they would agree that it's wow, it's something really special and really rare, but they would still have the quote unquote plausible deniability of the mystical ever occurring. And that's, how it is because that's one of the laws of the universe, right? Like, you can't just go with immediate proof and show it to someone else and be like, hey, look, I won, the jackpot 3 times in a row because, well, here is the divine architecture behind all of the events that occur in my life. So you shouldn't be able to sort of like show and teach it to other people. They need to discover it on their own, and you need to discover your own on your own, right? So think on this, please. Balance yourself. Try to balance yourself, and when you interface with something that's highly unlikely, treat it as if you're interfacing with something that's mystical and something that's meaning and function and a message to give but when you do that, don't forget at the same time, right? If you're unable to understand the pragmatic and logical part of it, uh, the experience won't stand because you won't understand the math behind it, right? Going too far either way, psychosis, schizophrenia, right? So you need to keep the perfect middle. So yeah, think on that, my friends. And thanks for listening.